Hey, Zaun, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Now, Evergreen has acquired a number of MSPs in ANZ in recent years. And from your vantage point, what is fundamentally changing in the MSP market from 2025 and now into 2026?
I think as we tick over into the next year, you'd always want to start with AI, but I actually want to take a different tact. And I would say the biggest thing that we're seeing that's changing for MSPs between years, Jeremy, is customers. So, there's significant global trends happening around the baby boomers exiting their businesses. And so for a lot of MSPs, they're seeing churn in their customer base, even though they're not doing anything wrong. Their service is great, their offering is great, but they're losing a lot of these baby boomer style businesses or similar because those businesses are being bought out, they're being sold, they're being merged or acquired by other companies. So this kind of no fault churn is starting to really impact MSPs, and it's accelerating kind of with the economy where it's at, with the pressures that businesses are feeling nationwide across ANZ. You're seeing MSPs encountering this constantly through no fault of their own or their team, and it's starting to really have a significant impact. So that's probably the number one shift and change we're seeing from 25 to 26 is just the acceleration of this. The second big
Wow.
impact between 25 to 26 that we're seeing is M&A. M&A in the Australian market started, and then in the last 5 years is accelerated to the point now where there are so many businesses that are coming into the MSP market externally that never had a footprint in the world of MSP. So we've long seen the rise of photocopiers and telco companies coming into the market, but now we're starting to see accountants and consulting firms and marketing firms and AI agencies and even ancillary businesses that have never before entered the market going, hey, MSP's onto something. We see it as a growing industry with great future potential. And so now they're looking to get into that market. So whether that is overseas investors or local investors, platforms, search funders, there is a lot more interest now. So you have a scenario where there's far more buyers and sellers in the market, which before has never existed. So the traditional multiples that you would see through brokers and buyers agents, etc., sellers agents, has now really sped up to quite a large extent. So people are offering their businesses up to market and sometimes seeing way more than they originally planned for, which is really shifting. And the last and final thing that we are seeing firsthand, especially as it relates across to the ANZ market, is, of course, what we started the conversation with, AI. As AI continues to make daily almost impacts into the news cycle, that has become front of mind for many MSPs. So when you think about AI for an MSP, they've gone through the change of cyber, they've gone through the change of cloud, they've gone through the change of mobile and 5G and the change of the internet and the dot-com boom. And so for many of those kind of 20, 30-year-old MSPs, the AI wave is just one wave too many. So many are now starting to think about like, hey, do I really want to sit through this? Do I really want to go through another curve jump? The other part of the MSP market is thinking, how do I leverage this? How do I take advantage of it? And for those that are brand new getting into it, we used to have a saying that you were born in the cloud MSP. Now you're an AI native MSP. And that's a whole new kettle of fish for people to get used to. So those are the big three trends we're seeing between 2025 and 2026.
That's so insightful. That is so awesome. Evergreen positions itself as a long-term holder that never sells and preserves autonomy. For MSP founders that you're talking to, in what ways does this differ from traditional private equity or from strategic buyers?
I think if you look at private equity, strategic buyers, and then Evergreen with our kind of buy and hold forever model, they're all ways to scale the mountain. So I'm not saying one's better than another. They're just three pathways up the mountain. But if you look at private equity for a moment, private equity typically operate on 3 to 5 year timeframes. So it's very fast growth, short timeframes, high expectations. And a lot of that growth is only achieved through further M&A acquisition. So oftentimes they're bringing someone into a portfolio that they're going to add on another provider. It's part of a platform. It needs to be integrated, but then there's more M&A happening on top of that. So the growth is driven by acquisition, and often that can mean a lot of disruption, a lot of kind of, okay, we've got to get these teams talking to each other. We've got to centralize them. But it means there's a lot of moving parts in a short space of time. And that just creates chaos for many people. And unfortunately, it's often the staff and the customers that bear the brunt of that shift. Now, that's a common issue that we see in our business. And we think the less disruption, the less interruption you can have in an MSP's environment, the better. Because if your staff are happy and your customers are happy, then your MSP's financial bottom line should be happy. So this PE creates a lot of that push pressure that we see coming into the market. The next one are strategic buyers. And I would say that there is a really good space for strategic buyers where they're bringing a business that maybe on its own as a standalone business isn't ready to be fully integrated into a PE platform, is maybe smaller, more nimble, but fits well with a strategic buyer. So oftentimes what's getting lost is the brand. In a strategic buyer, they're moving from your MSP to someone else's MSP brand. So that kind of succession legacy, that name that you've built up that you see around town is moving away and being removed from social view. A lot of times that's a thing from a perspective of here's what I built, that someone is taking your Lego kit and deconstructing and dismantling it. And it's something you've worked hard for 15, 20, 30 years for. So that kind of, hey, we've built this and it stands here forever, it disappears for many people. And that also means culture. A lot of MSP owners work really hard to secure their culture for the long term. And it doesn't mean the strategic acquirers have a poor culture. It's just different and it's often not yours. So we see that as impacting those sellers quite significantly because they want to preserve that and they lose that autonomy because now suddenly someone else is directing traffic, telling people what to do, taking over HR and payroll, and they're losing that functionality. In our model, our approach to that is definitely around decentralization. So we still have the founders run in about 30% of cases. 30% of cases, we have a 2IC or kind of minority shareholder step in to run the business. 30% of cases, we have to find a new CEO if they're retiring. But what happens is those people have the full autonomy and responsibility to run that MSP, retaining their people, their systems, their brand, their culture, their legacy forever. And that's kind of the model that we really subscribe to. The second part of the difference for us compared to strategic buyers and PE buyers is a huge focus on being decentralized. So if you're using ConnectWise, you stay with ConnectWise. If it's Halo, you stay with Halo. If it's Kaseya, you stay with Kaseya. We don't ask people to change their RMM and PSAs to something that we want. We don't get them onto centralized payroll. So all of their admin people and finance people, which is often family members or people they've known for years, are safe. Now, that might mean we have to provide extra support for a finance lift, but a lot of those people, or all of those people, stay in play and we just add to that team. And the last thing that we do is help them with scale, and that is around most predominantly sales. So a lot of people are looking for, how do I leverage our expertise to grow? We have 100 plus MSPs in our portfolio, and we have a ton of benchmarks, best practices, and playbooks that they can learn and leverage from. So that becomes this shared knowledge that they get from learning from all of these other MSPs that have been on the journey while still running their own race. And that allows them to do what they do well in the geography with their customers that they support day to day, but taking this best of breed kind of philosophy and approach to how they help everyone in their market, which helps them thrive.
Fantastic. You just mentioned premium multiple. You earlier referred to commanding multiples in the market today. As director of MSP M&A in ANZ, when you're assessing an MSP today, what are the core elements or business metrics that immediately tell you whether that MSP could command a premium multiple?
I mean, the first one that you look at when it comes to a premium multiple is definitely profitability. So we look at across ANZ, a lot of benchmarking tools, the best in class. If you were to take 100 MSPs, which is the top 25 of those 100 MSPs, they're doing at least 18% profitability EBITDA. So that 18% is kind of the framework to say, hey, if you're at 18 to 20% profitability, That's the first and foremost indicator that, hey, this is a well-run business. Because if you were to take the next 50 MSPs out of that 100, the kind of the median, they're closer to 10, right? So they're half the top performance. And then the bottom 25 are often losing money, so that bottom 25 of the MSP market is losing money, or they're closer to kind of 3 or 5%, and it kind of keeps halving. And so for us, when we look at MSPs, profitability is that first indicator. The second indicator that we like to look at is, do they have a high percentage of labor-based managed recurring services? Because that recurring service percentage is a good indicator of how mature and how functional the business has become at onboarding, growing, retaining managed services revenue, whether that's managed support, managed security, managed backup, it doesn't matter. But you look for this high recurring revenue mix in the business. Obviously, you want the traditional pieces around low client concentration, no client greater than 20% of revenue, those kind of things. But that high percentage is really key. And the third factor I would say, just at a high level that you look for is the business growing? When you're talking about a premium multiple, the business as usual is, hey, it's profitable, it's got recurring services, it's not got any client concentration, but actually, is it growing? Does it have a track record of building and growing its own revenue, hiring and finding new salespeople to help the business continue to perform? And that's hard. A lot of owners come to us where they've been growing strongly because they're in a vertical or a niche, or the founder is very good at sales. And I think they're all great use cases, and we support that. Premium multiples come through. Do you have a diversified management team? Is the owner not reliant? And can the business feed itself without the owner being there? And that becomes something that starts to lean into, hey, this business is going to attract a premium multiple.
Yeah, fantastic. It all makes absolute sense. We're in a period of intense consolidation. How do you think the MSP industry and this consolidation is reshaping the competitive landscape here locally? I'd be particularly interested in whether you think that is impacting even how MSPs leveraged vendor relationships, and how it's impacting pricing and such things as talent acquisition.
Yeah, I think what we see in particular, and I'll start with talent, because a lot of challenges that MSPs have, and when I'm speaking with them in the market, is, hey, I can't find great people. I try, but I don't. I'm not able to find great people, and so I can't grow the business. And the question that you always ended up is, well, why would a great person want to work with your firm? If a great person, who's good at their role has substantial other options, does your employment brand differentiate and stand out? And so this is something that MSPs haven't thought a lot about. There's a few really good ones in the market in ANZ, but what we're seeing is a lot of the talent already knows who the good MSPs are. It's kind of like with the advent of social media now, which restaurants are good and which shows are great and which movies are getting good reviews. There's no difference with an MSP's employee profile. How they're viewed on Glassdoor or comments on Facebook or Instagram posts. Do they even have a social media footprint? I talk to many owners who think, social media is a waste of time. It may be for your clients, but it's not for your staff. People want to know that you exist. And so from a talent perspective, the better you can attract talent will be directly proportional to your footprint in the market. And now, whether that's branding or marketing, you need to have a footprint for not just customers, but more importantly, especially in today's competitive age, around staff. That's how they measure you. They don't have a lot of information. They're definitely not having access to your profit and loss, but they're measuring you on that social footprint. So I would say that's becoming a big shift that people didn't have in their visibility beforehand that now is standing out. The next thing that I would say is larger brands, and somewhat connected to talent, but also segues into customers. Larger brands in the market are getting eyeballs, and that's because they may not be looking to switch to them. But when it's not a tier one brand, when you think about the big vendors, tech vendors like Microsoft and IBM and Cisco, we all think, people know them. Why does my MSP have to be known? Well, it doesn't have to be known nationwide, but it probably should be known in your local city or town.
Yeah.
And that means that footprint that you have around, hey, where do my customers see me turn up? Because if you're only in one location, but your customers aren't showing up there, that's not really helpful. Where are your customers showing up? And does your brand show up in the same place that your customers show up? And too many people don't have the answer to that question. Maybe they got a word of mouth referral and they just have never asked, but it'd be a great question for MSPs to go back to their last 20 customers and say, how did you hear about us? Where were the places you saw our name? Where did you find out about us? Because it's just not happening. And so what's connected to that is your suppliers and your vendors in some way are also your customers. Whether that's backing you for MDF, supporting you for events or funding, your vendors want to know that you're out there and you have the capability to actually market yourself, to sell the business, to talk about your differentiators, what makes you unique in the market. And they don't want to support just vanilla ice cream MSPs. They're looking for Ben and Jerry's. And if that's you and you're able to differentiate in that way, maybe it's just being authentic. Maybe it's a vertical. Maybe it's your model. It probably isn't the fact that you've been around for 20 years, have good customer service and great techs, because that's salt and pepper. Everyone has that on the table. In today's day and age, we're looking at rush to be ISO 27001. The question to ask MSPs is, once you've got that, what's your next point of differentiation? Because it only lasts as long as it takes for your competitors to replicate it. And I would say brand is something that sits above that. And too often they think it's just customers. It's not. It's staff and vendors and suppliers in the market. And not forgetting that all of those things connected together help with scale. So as an MSP scales, in the case of Evergreen, we have a lot of ability to help provide best-in-class pricing based on global purchasing agreements for all the MSPs in our portfolio. But so do some of the larger MSPs across the country right now. So that means for smaller and mid-tier MSPs, if you are angling on competing on price, that just ends up being margin compression at your end, because the larger people already have the gross margin to actually weather that storm, because they've already got a lower cost of goods sold. They're already buying their licensing at a cheaper price. So all of those combined are creating this kind of storm, if you like, for smaller MSPs, that they have to be fighting battles on multiple fronts. But that's a requirement as the market matures. And we've seen that with accountants. Accountants have gone from, doing the tax return and there being lots of sole independent accountants, to then they became members of smaller, city firms, to national firms, to now global firms and affiliations. And that has changed the accounting market. IT is very much a similar professional service firm. Every business has an accountant. Every business has a lawyer. Nowadays, according to Omdia Canalis, every business just about has an IT firm. So you're no longer going into a market without competition. Are you prepared for it?
This is a masterclass here. Let's go. Very, very cool. Now, Zaun, you're in a category of your own because you yourself built, grew, and exited Leap Consulting over a period of 21 years. Speaking from experience, what advice would you give MSP founders as they're considering a future exit strategy, or if they're starting to get their head around succession planning?
I would say, the first point that you raised there, Jeremy, around succession planning is important. Too often we put off that conversation. Like a lot of us fell into the market, we ended up thinking we could do it better, or it was an opportunity and we went into the last thing we thought about was how do we get out of it? And we're very happy to be in business, but the last consideration was, well, what happens in the future? And what does that look like? And kind of, there's that really cliched analogy that most of us spend more time planning our holiday than our financial future. And I think that's the same for the future of our MSPs, whether that is like staff succession, family succession, external succession, running it under management. They're all different types of successions, selling to third parties. People need to think about, because having your ladder leaning against the right wall in the future is something that you have to prepare for 3 years in the past. You can't just put your ladder up one morning and say, right, I'm ready to go, unless you've been actually operating according to certain kind of rhythms and structure and discipline a long time beforehand. And don't get me wrong, I see that happen. I see MSPs who have kind of stumbled into the right rhythm and they've never really thought about it, but the business is perfectly ready to sell. And that's really by fortunate circumstances rather than deliberate planning. But I would say that's in the 1% of cases. 99% of cases, businesses haven't thought through, like, what does an exit look like? And I would say similar to what we see when we look at our house and we go, hey, what's my house worth? It's like, yep, I'm in this suburb, I'm close to this school. We think that's going to have value long term. With your MSP, well, what business model do you have? And is it going to be a value long term? Like, what niche or vertical do you serve? What is your approach to going to the market? What is your approach to scaling? All of these things have value. And the challenge that people think about is, but I'm not ready to sell. I don't want to talk to anyone. Well, actually, great. Don't talk to anyone, but understand what are the options that are going to give you choices in 5 to 10 years, because that's how long it'll take if you're wrong. And most people don't think about this. They go and work 20 years, 30 years, and then they get ready to exit and go, like, I'm not ready. I'm still dependent for everything in the business. I'm still doing tickets or running projects or being a level 3 or doing quotes. If that's your business after 20 years and you're trying to sell tomorrow, that's a very different conversation to someone who's been non-operational, who hasn't had to get involved in those things. And so that a lot of the time was my experience was, thanks to the benefit of peer groups, we were able to learn the value of planning and both leadership, life, legacy planning, looking at how we plan well in our business, get ourselves out of being the bottleneck. And then that allowed me to exit. And I was fortunate to exit to my business partner rather than to a third party. But that structure facilitated that, because without that, that would have been very hard if I was so tied in intimately to day-to-day running of the business. Vice versa for him. So for organizations that need to think about what happens in the future, I'd say start planning today. I mean, begin with the end in mind, as Stephen Covey says. Like, you may not want to think about it, you may not be prepared to think about it, but it needs to be something on your kind of urgent but not important list that you start to spend time on. Ask those around, get advice. It always amazes me. People think their business is worth a certain value at the day they want to sell it. You would have been better asking that questions 5 years prior. Because if you knew it wasn't going to hit your superannuation or retirement goal, then you had 5 years to fix it, not 90 days to try and work out how you're going to plug the gap.
Awesome advice. Great insights. Thank you very much. That is really cool.